Most people believe they control their mind. They believe thoughts are chosen. They believe reactions are voluntary. They believe decisions are conscious. This belief feels natural. It feels obvious. It feels so obvious that questioning it can feel unnecessary. But the mind does not operate the way it feels. Feeling is not a reliable guide to mechanism. The brain does not wait for awareness to begin acting. It prepares. Before certainty appears, neural systems are already active. They evaluate the environment. They compare past outcomes. They predict what comes next. This process is automatic. It does not ask permission. And because it happens quietly, it feels like choice. This is why the illusion is so convincing. Neuroscience shows that decisions begin milliseconds before conscious awareness appears. By the time you feel, "I decided," the process is already underway. The decision is not born in awareness. Awareness arrives midway through the process. This distinction matters because it changes what control actually means. Awareness does not lead, it follows. And following is different from directing. Conscious thought often arrives late, not to decide, but to explain. It constructs a narrative that makes the action feel intentional. This is not deception. It is integration. The mind prefers coherence. This explains something subtle. People often feel confused by their own behavior. They say one thing, then do another. They make promises, then break them. They form intentions, and abandon them. They assume this means they are inconsistent. In reality, they are consistent. They are consistent with the system that was dominant in that moment. Emotion shifts availability. Stress narrows options. Familiar patterns rise first. Under pressure, the brain does not explore. It defaults. This is not weakness. It is efficiency. Free will exists, but it operates inside constraints. Those constraints are shaped by biology, past experience, emotional state, and immediate context. You do not choose from infinite options. You choose from what the mind makes available in that moment. And availability is not neutral. Most people never notice this, because the process feels seamless. But seamless does not mean intentional. It means practiced. The mind relies on shortcuts. These shortcuts evolved to conserve energy. Thinking is metabolically expensive. Efficiency keeps the system alive. Shortcuts reduce effort. They speed response. They preserve resources. But efficiency comes with distortion. Confirmation bias filters information. It favors what is familiar. It protects existing beliefs. Contradictory information is downplayed, not rejected consciously, filtered automatically. Negativity bias prioritizes threat. The brain assumes it is safer to overdetect danger than to miss it. This keeps you alert. It also keeps you tense. Availability bias magnifies what is vivid. What is emotional feels important. What is recent feels relevant. What is repeated feels true. Together, these biases shape perception. They decide what enters awareness and what never does. This is why disagreement rarely feels intellectual. It feels personal. Because perception feels like reality. You do not see the world as it is. You see the world as your nervous system interprets it. Two people can experience the same moment and leave with entirely different meanings. Neither feels mistaken. Both feel accurate. Bias does not disappear when it is identified, but its grip weakens when it is observed. Awareness does not erase bias. It creates distance from it. That distance matters, because distance restores flexibility. There is an important consequence of this perceptual filtering. When perception feels accurate, it rarely feels optional. People defend their view of reality because it feels identical to truth. This is why correction often feels like attack. The nervous system reacts before reasoning has time to intervene. Defensiveness is not stubbornness. It is protection. Once perception is shaped, behavior follows naturally. Choices feel justified. Reactions feel necessary. Distance feels logical. This creates a quiet loop. Perception shapes reaction. Reaction reinforces belief. Belief strengthens perception. The loop closes without awareness. Over time, this loop becomes identity, not because it was chosen, but because it was repeated. This is why change often feels destabilizing. The mind does not resist change because it is wrong. It resists change because it disrupts predictability. Predictability feels safe, even when it is limiting. This matters because most people attempt change at the level of behavior. They try to act differently, but behavior sits downstream from perception. If perception remains unchanged, behavior eventually reverts. Not due to failure, but due to alignment. The system always returns to what feels internally consistent. This is why awareness is not passive. It is structural. The moment perception is observed, its authority weakens. Not immediately, but reliably. Observation creates a gap, and that gap is where control actually exists. Not at the level of impulse, but at the level of interpretation. This distinction is subtle, but it changes everything that follows. Emotional control is often misunderstood. Many people believe control means suppression. They believe strength means silence. They believe calm means feeling nothing. But suppression is not regulation. Avoidance is not stability. Suppression stores emotion. Avoidance delays it. Regulation means allowing sensation without losing direction. It means staying present while emotion passes through. Emotion is temporary, but resistance extends it. The nervous system learns through repetition. What you repeatedly tolerate becomes familiar. What becomes familiar becomes normal. What becomes normal becomes your baseline. This is why patterns persist. Not because people choose them, but because the body recognizes them. Calm is not passive. Calm is trained. It is built through exposure, breathing, and restraint. It is a physiological skill, not a personality trait. When the mind is unfocused, it does not rest. It turns inward. This internal activity is known as the default mode network. It activates when attention has no anchor. This system generates rumination. It replays conversations. It imagines outcomes. It evaluates the self. It asks questions without resolution. Unchecked, it produces anxiety, self-criticism, and mental fatigue. This is why stillness can feel uncomfortable. Silence gives the system room to speak. Idle minds are rarely peaceful, not because something is wrong, but because the system is active without direction. Presence interrupts this loop. Structure weakens it. Attention gives the mind something to organize around. Focus reduces noise, not permanently, but reliably. Without direction, the mind fills space. It creates stories. It generates concern. It searches for threat. Not because it is broken, but because it is designed to anticipate. The mind needs direction, or it creates noise. Most reactions are not chosen. They are learned. They are shaped long before awareness steps in. Tone, facial expression, silence. The mind assigns meaning before logic has time to intervene. This process is fast. It happens beneath language. And because it happens early, it feels instinctive. But instinct is often memory disguised as impulse. The nervous system records patterns. What followed safety? What followed threat? What required adaptation? These recordings do not fade with time. They become defaults. This is why familiar situations trigger familiar reactions. Even when they no longer apply, conditioning does not require trauma. It requires repetition, repeated exposure, repeated response, repeated outcome. Over time, the body learns what to expect. An expectation guides behavior. Much of adult behavior is not chosen consciously. It is retrieved from earlier learning. This explains why people react before they think, why explanation comes later, why logic struggles to override feeling. The body moves first. The mind explains second. This is efficient. But it is not precise. Conditioning creates speed. It does not guarantee accuracy. This matters because most people judge themselves harshly for reactions they did not design. They assume intention where there was pattern. Understanding this restores clarity, not by removing responsibility, but by relocating it. Responsibility does not begin at reaction. It begins at awareness. Dopamine plays a central role in this system. It is often misunderstood. Dopamine is not pleasure. It is anticipation. It motivates pursuit. It signals relevance. It tells the system, pay attention to this. When anticipation is constant, the system becomes restless. Modern environments provide endless cues, notifications, scrolling, waiting, checking. Each cue creates anticipation. Each anticipation demands resolution. Over time, baseline motivation erodes, not because people lack discipline, but because the signal never rests. When reward is constant, effort loses meaning. The system adapts. Motivation flattens. This is not failure. It is calibration. The brain adjusts to what is normal. Without friction, desire weakens. Without effort, engagement fades. This is why stimulation does not satisfy. It exhausts. Identity emerges from this process, not as a fixed trait, but as a reinforced pattern. Thoughts repeated become beliefs. Beliefs repeated become behaviors. Behaviors repeated become identity. Identity is not discovered. It is constructed. And once constructed, it resists change, not because it is true, but because it is familiar. The mind protects what feels consistent. Consistency feels safe, even when it limits growth. This is why change often feels threatening. Not intellectually, physiologically. Change disrupts prediction, and prediction keeps the system calm. The brain prefers a predictable problem to an unfamiliar solution. This preference is rarely conscious, but it is powerful. Attention is the mechanism that sustains identity. Where attention goes, reinforcement follows. Repeated attention strengthens pathways. Ignored pathways weaken. This is not metaphor. It is physiology. Distraction is not random. It is engineered. Modern systems compete for attention because attention is allocation. What receives attention receives neural resources. This is why focus feels effortful. You are reallocating limited capacity. Attention discipline is not self-control. It is self-direction. Without it, the system fragments. With it, patterns stabilize. The observer effect completes the loop. The moment a thought is observed, it changes. Not because it disappears, but because distance appears. Observation introduces space. Space reduces urgency. Urgency drives reaction. This is the foundation of psychological flexibility. You cannot stop thoughts from appearing, but you can change your relationship to them. Awareness does not fight the mind. It witnesses it. And witnessing weakens automatic authority. Over time, this changes behavior. Not through force, through clarity. This is not immediate. It is cumulative. Small observations compound. Patterns loosen. Options widen. This is where control actually exists, not at the level of impulse, but at the level of interpretation. Understanding the mind does not make life easier. It makes it clearer. And clarity changes how everything that follows is experienced.